scale. It's the only thing that separates this from this. It's how we differentiate between this and this. There was a strange observation made by filmgoers upon seeing Godzilla Minus One for the first time. Despite this iteration of Godzilla being the smallest he has been in over 20 years, coming in at around 50.1 meters or 164 feet, he felt enormous. Perhaps larger than ever before. Alternatively, Toho's introduction of Godzilla Earth, the largest iteration of the character ever put to film, coming in at around 318 meters or 1,043 feet, fell short. No matter how large the characters tell you Godzilla is, he somehow feels smaller than ever. There are lots of reasons for this, both technical and not. But today, I will lay out the key fundamentals needed to master the art of kaiju filmmaking and create proper scale, so that Godzilla doesn't feel like a reptilian superhero, but like the king of the monsters. Before we can get into choreographing our kaiju, we must first take a look at the real world and how we perceive scale. Have you ever seen the moon on the horizon? It looks truly massive, a powerful and dominating celestial body peeking over our skyline, and diminishing all of our human accomplishments and advancements without an ounce of effort. And yet, that same moon can appear as a tiny, lonely, distant dot lost in the sky when it finds itself above our heads at night. But how can this be? The moon isn't changing its distance from Earth that dramatically every night as it orbits us. We simply perceive it to be. This phenomenon is known as the moon on horizon illusion. As famous know-it-all and brilliant scientist Neil deGrasse Tyson explained on CBS Morning News, as the moon appears on the horizon, we see it juxtaposed against the mountains, trees, and buildings, which we recognize are far away, but our brains can't differentiate between just how much further away the moon is than those objects. As a result, our depth cues are tricked into believing the moon is closer than it is, and even larger compared to the objects we're familiar with. As the moon rises, it stays the exact same size, but loses its context clues, resulting in the illusion of it shrinking into the sky above. There are ways to defeat this illusion, however. If you view the moon upside down through your legs as it enters the horizon, your brain will often fail to process the context clues around the moon, and it shrinks again. You can also measure the moon on a fixed point, like your fingernail, and observe overnight as it fails to change in size. This core concept is exactly what makes kaiju kaiju. Otherwise, they are just dinosaurs. To prove this and to uncover some of the techniques used in giving kaiju their immensity, we can look at no better example than Ishiro Honda's largely overlooked and highly underrated 1965 film Frankenstein vs. Baragon, or Frankenstein Conquers the World. By the way, Frankenstein isn't the only one trying to conquer the world. Data brokers and online entities are always on the lookout for your personal information so they can use it against you, which is why I'm excited to announce that this video is sponsored by Aura. Aura is an app that lets you monitor and control what of your private information is shared online. Have you received an email or an update or a notification saying that you have been the victim of a data leak or a data breach and that your information has been shared online? Well, then Aura could not be better for you. Through their app, they can give you steps to take on if this happens so that you can secure your information. They can also tell you exactly what of your information was put out there. Have you not gotten an email or a notification that your data might have been breached and is out there online? Well, then Aura could not be better for you, because how do you know? Aura's security breach and dark web monitoring can keep you informed if any of your data winds up where it shouldn't. And the reason that's the case is because data brokers like to buy and sell your personal information to profit off of you without your consent or knowledge. And that's another thing Aura can help step in with. Aura can monitor and identify some of these data brokers and submit opt-out requests so that you don't have to get your information removed from their databases, so that way they can't sell it any longer. This includes opting you out of junk mail and reducing the amount of spam calls you get. In fact, Aura was recently able to identify and opt me out of 17 different data brokers that were using my personal information without my knowledge at all, and it all happens behind the scenes. They take care of it so you don't have to. Their app also features a VPN, a password manager, an antivirus that can help protect you against malware, and real-time credit and identity theft monitoring. This is so much to offer in one affordable app, so stop leaving yourself vulnerable to data breaches. Don't let them conquer the world. Go to my sponsor Aura.com/dman to get yourself a 14-day free trial trial and to see if any of your data has been exposed. Another huge thank you to Aura for sponsoring, and big thank you to you guys for using my sponsored links when I have them. It helps out so much. Frankenstein vs. Baragon is a wonderful film to study because its central gigantic lead is not a strange beast, but instead a man. The film sees the heart of Dr. Frankenstein's monster irradiated after it was delivered to the Japanese during World War II. As a result, it begins to grow out of control, first taking the form of a young boy, and then increasing until we are left with a 66-foot mutant. Over the course of the second act, we are told multiple times that Frankenstein is growing at an irregular rate, but the reveal of just how large he's getting doesn't set in right away, even after they move the creature to a cage. It's only once we see Kumi Mizuno's Suiko Togami enter the frame with him that we get the context as to how large he has become. Before that moment, Frankenstein was the size of a man, but after Togami enters, just like the Horizon Moon, the illusion is born. As the film progresses, Frankenstein continues to grow, but it isn't until he escapes his cage that we really get a sense of how much he's changed. This is where the filmmakers use one of the most obvious tools in their arsenal to make the creature feel large: camera angle. By placing the camera at low angles, Frankenstein is given size, stature, presence, and power. Later, Frankenstein returns to the street where we were first introduced to him on. In this moment, we can contrast the small boy who was hit by a car with the humongous man eclipsing the trees around him. Another benefit to looking at Frankenstein is his relative lack of size amongst other kaiju. He isn't Godzilla, he doesn't loom over cities. Because of this, Frankenstein, who clocks in at one of Toho's smallest kaiju, moves very fast. Speed is a core component of scale, which means that Frankenstein's rapid movements need to be done very carefully. Even when the filmmakers don't rely on low angles to give Frankenstein scale, the deliberate slow motion and wonderful miniature work done on this film contextualizes every single step he takes with environments we are deeply familiar with, allowing us to see how much ground is covered in a single step. Even when Frankenstein moves to the forest, the trees scale with him accurately, but his 66-foot status doesn't shrink them so much they lose their dimension and appear as shrubs by his feet. It's due to this contrast that Frankenstein feels larger at 20 feet near the apartment complexes or 66 feet in the mountains than King Kong does while he's fighting the Scar King in Hollow Earth. In fact, this trick can work in the opposite direction. It's why King Kong and Zuko feel so small while approaching the lake, surrounded by monstrous trees that we, the viewer, can't even fathom the size of. Our brains associate trees with trees. We all know trees are large, but without context, they're only large to a point. Moments like this, or Godzilla wandering through the jungle in 1994's Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, accidentally shrink our kaiju, making them feel more insignificant than ever. Even if it makes sense for it to be a tree that large, given that it exists in a world of monsters, we perceive it to be a normally large tree, redefining our kaiju's proportions, especially when our human characters adventure through the Hollow Earth surrounded by normal-sized trees, never once interacting with the kaiju-sized greenery. This effect is only amplified if the kaiju suddenly begin moving at near Frankenstein levels of speed. Kong can have a rapid battle with the Skullcrawler without losing his weight because the human cast is in the center of it and the environment is real. If you displace this exact battle to a barren wasteland, everything feels smaller in comparison. It's this exact trick that makes Godzilla Earth feel so small. The futuristic setting with Earth overrun with plant life and kaiju vegetation completely robs Godzilla of his context. Now when Godzilla Earth moves, he just feels slow. Sure, he's larger than our characters and seems larger than Godzilla Phileas, but we have no idea of just how much bigger he is. He still feels like Godzilla wandering around the hillside. His size has lost its impact. As far as the MonsterVerse goes, and amongst modern filmmakers, one man is hailed as the king of scale. This man is Godzilla 2014's director, Gareth Edwards. A few years ago, Tough Specialist put together a wonderful video on how Gareth Edwards uses a few special tricks to add immense scale to his films. I highly recommend you go watch this video for yourself, as it does a wonderful deep dive into these philosophies. For now, I will quickly recap some of those ideas. The first rule is to never show the edges of a character or an object. By framing them close enough to where they extend off the screen or obscuring the edges behind something, our brains fill in the rest and make them larger than ever. If you are going to show the entire object, covering it in an atmospheric haze is a good way to add depth to the frame, making it feel so distant that it takes on enormous qualities again. Edwards' second rule is one that has been understood by kaiju filmmakers ever since King Kong first appeared in 1933. As Edwards so eloquently states,
something's only big when it's relative to something else, and And that's the key, is always having the something else.
An ape is an ape. An ape is a monster when you see it towering over a woman. Kong was first thought of as a 50-foot monster during the production of the 1933 film, but in actuality he only scales between 18 and 24 feet depending on the sequence. It's actually this exact reason that makes him feel even more enormous in King Kong 1976 when he is portrayed between 42 and 55 feet. Jordan Vogt Roberts understood this idea better than anyone. He didn't want Kong to be an ape or a monster. He wanted Kong to be a god. This is why he increased Kong's size to 104 feet for Kong Skull Island. But this isn't purely enough. That's why there are only 2 short sequences in the entire film where we cut to Kong without a human character grounding our perspective and giving him size. You need the characters and relatable objects on screen with Kong so that he achieves this godly status. Another small trick all kaiju filmmakers use without telling you is to cheat the scale for key shots and moments while not stretching our limits so far that we notice the break in scale. Kong's reveal in front of the sunset shrouds Kong in haze, playing into the hidden edges effect while showing his full silhouette. To keep that sense of scale, the crew boosted Kong by hundreds of feet for this shot. They did the same for the bloody handprint on the mountainside. Edwards uses this trick throughout Godzilla 2014 as well, most notably increasing Godzilla's size at the Golden Gate Bridge. He also portrays Godzilla hundreds of feet larger than he really is throughout his appearance in Hawaii and his exit from San Francisco. The basic trick at play here is to take something we, the viewer, know is massive and then to make it look small next to our key object. For instance, taking the Golden Gate Bridge and having Godzilla tower over it. And because of that, something Edwards worked very cautiously to avoid is putting an actor so close to the foreground that the kaiju feels like it takes up as much or less space than the actor, making the kaiju look even smaller. Edwards' final trick is knowing the VFX workflow. As someone who spent over a decade working on visual effects, he learned the tricks of the trade. Edwards knows how to film things in the real world and implement VFX later to enhance them, adding realism and scale to them. This is the same advantage Takashi Yamazaki leveraged when making Godzilla Minus One that won him the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects. Yamazaki uses these tricks constantly throughout Godzilla Minus One and takes them to another level. While Godzilla is enormous in Godzilla 2014, there are still a few times where he can come across even smaller than Yamazaki's Godzilla, and that's due to a lack of intimacy. Yamazaki exclusively places Godzilla in the context of people and uses his lack of size to his advantage. A 400-foot Godzilla isn't going to take notice of you the same way that a 164-foot Godzilla will. Godzilla is closer to our size, allowing him motivation to come after us in direct and malicious ways. Yamazaki combines Edwards' tricks to scale with his own human intimacy to create the ultimate Godzilla experience. Godzilla's first introduction on Oto shrouds the character in so much shadow and frames him in ways that we never really get a full look at his body even once. Even when he's lumbering towards us in a wide shot and we can see mostly his entire body, he is positioned in a way that hides his lower legs or his upper back, or his body is tucked behind his head, so that he's coming right at us and we don't get a sense of what his full proportions look like. When Godzilla occupies the screen with a human character, he dominates it. Our cast members always being visually oppressed by him, kept to the lower half of the frame. There is a fantastic long take that sees Godzilla attacking the men, killing them one by one. All the while we only glimpse a piece of his head, or his enormous foot, or his tail striking down. We never get a good look at him. Throughout the majority of the film, Yamazaki expertly keeps Godzilla partially submerged in water, again hiding the edges. During many of the ocean sequences in the film, Yamazaki creates scale and tension with Godzilla by allowing him to dip in and out of the water, giving him an element of surprise by hiding how much more of him there is left to attack us with. When Godzilla rises up, he feels incredibly large, yet we only ever see the top half of him. The same tricks are used to give the Takao scale, which prompts Godzilla to rise even higher to overpower it. Again, Yamazaki always gives Godzilla the highest point on the frame to allow him that power, and it's only when Godzilla disappears below into our imaginations that he unleashes his ultimate power. The same tricks apply to Godzilla's attack on Ginza. Even when Godzilla is shown in wide shots or framed level to his head rather than at low angles, the edges remain off screen. Even in a wide shot, Godzilla is too large to capture all at once. Buildings and other familiar objects help to both obscure him and juxtapose him against objects we are familiar with the size of. One of my favorite shots in the entire movie sees Godzilla's feet crushing crowds of people, only to slowly tilt up to meet his head high in the sky. It's moments like this that give Godzilla Godzilla a larger feel at 164 feet than he has at 400 feet in the MonsterVerse films. Godzilla is here, in our world, next to us, attacking us, dominating us. That's what makes Godzilla a god, rather than an oversized superhero. But what if I were to say that one film does all of this even better than any of our other examples, while taking the action up a notch, proving that you can have stylistic movement, fight choreography, pacing, and thrills without sacrificing an ounce of presence or scale? That movie is Guillermo del Toro's 2013 masterpiece, Pacific Rim. The way del Toro frames Trespasser during his opening attack on the Golden Gate Bridge conveys more power, mystery, and scale than Godzilla's attack on the same location due to the intense close angles used. We never one time get a sense for what Trespasser looks like in full during this attack, creating true mystery that lets our imaginations run wild. And while I don't think that approach was needed for the start of Godzilla 2014's final act, it does provide an interesting point of comparison. Throughout the film, despite rapid anime-inspired action sequences, del Toro doesn't waver on a few key traits that takes everything we've been talking about to the next level. The Hong Kong sequence is one of the most thrilling kaiju set pieces ever put to film, and it kicks off in the ocean. This is a bold move that nearly robs the start of the sequence entirely of its scale, but del Toro expertly maneuvers around this. A very important key to this is through the atmosphere. There's a reason Pacific Rim is such a rainy movie, and it's not to hide the CGI. We get to see the way the rain interacts with these enormous characters on screen, and through that, their size is revealed. The same goes for the ocean, and the smoke, and the atmospheric haze. All of these things must work in tandem with the characters' movements on screen to both slow them down and give them power. Still, it's a bold choice to set so much of the movie in the ocean, but del Toro knows this and has done a lot to justify it. To begin, he spends nearly an entire hour familiarizing you with the size and scale of a Jaeger, so that when it's framed without a human, they still feel huge. Scale cues were used constantly to give the Jaegers their size early on, whether it be scaffolding in front of them or people standing next to them. They also build scale cues onto the Jaegers themselves, such as ladders, hatches, and metal paneling. They also hide human objects like the Hong Kong skyline in the background of the sequence, or helicopters in the air, beaming lights down on the fight. This isn't done on accident. The first way del Toro worked to create mass for these creatures was the same way all good kaiju filmmakers do, through context. We see them framed against office buildings and bridges and people. To amplify this point, del Toro gave specific instructions, like that cars must be thrown around like pebbles. Del Toro worked effortlessly to create a language of debris. A building can't just explode into chunks. It has to break in ways that shatter glass and spread paper through the streets. It has to dump desks and office chairs and TVs out its wounds. These things are minute and unnoticeable to the naked eye, but they are there because they are real, and it gives context and meaning to every action. When Gypsy breaks storage crates against Leatherback's face, they explode in ways that reveal couches, luxury items like cars and mopeds. This attention to detail is created through a passionate filmmaker who understands the VFX process and the importance to it. During the action, del Toro always keeps the movements very strict. Not only do we see the physical exertion of our human characters in moving the Jaegers, but he worked incredibly hard to make sure the mechs don't move like humans despite being operated by humans. They move like heavy machinery. Pistons must lock and unlock to create power. Gears need to turn for them to function, and because the Jaeger's so large, we get to see all of this happening on screen. And the fights are not slow in any regard, and these rules extend beyond the Jaegers and back to the kaiju themselves. While grounding the kaiju's movements with relatable objects, del Toro also works hard to let the kaiju move without sacrificing their weight. He does so in a few key ways. One of my favorite subtle tricks del Toro uses is a subtle camera shake that creates mass and power with every step taken. Another is through physics and momentum. If del Toro wants a kaiju to move quickly, he lets it, but the kaiju has to work hard to earn that movement. Gypsy and Leatherback can sprint at one another into an all-out brawl, but they first have to work up the speed to do so. Edwards uses a similar trick, albeit he caps the movements off much slower in Godzilla 2014. There is no moment in the entire film that underscores the power of scale like Gypsy Danger dragging the enormous ship across the street, stepping directly over the camera in the process. This shot is the pinnacle of kaiju filmmaking, combining both everything we've talked about up till now and that we will talk about following. Del Toro's tricks extend beyond Pacific Rim and into the modern kaiju landscape. One of the benefits of CGI over suitmation is the ability to reveal texture. Because the kaiju can be designed in such intense digital landscapes, the camera can get closer to them than ever before, revealing textures that would have never come into focus on a creature the size of a man. Their skin must be designed to look one way from afar, but the closer we get, the more intricate it becomes. This trick is used extensively in movies like Pacific Rim, Kong Skull Island, and Godzilla vs. Kong. The final pillar of scale is one that is often undiscussed because it isn't something we see, but something we experience and feel. The final pillar of creating scale is sound design. Every movement a kaiju makes needs to be amplified by 100 in the sound design. Every tail wag should create a whoosh, every footstep an explosion, every roar a volcanic eruption of power. Pacific Rim, Godzilla 2014, and Godzilla Minus One do incredible jobs at this. For both Godzilla films, Godzilla's roars were created and then played out in massive reverberating chambers, re-recorded and sampled, and then played back to give them even more power. In Pacific Rim, every movement was underscored by a unique and powerful sound that indicates its presence. Lots of this is done through bass and booms that we hear in our chests and our bodies rather than our ears. One of my favorite moments in the MonsterVerse is a combination of all of this. After Kong starts to panic on his transport in the rain, where we can see the environment working with the eighth wonder of the world to give him presence, Gia approaches. From thoughtful low angles, the immediacy and intimacy of this moment sets in, with Kong directly acknowledging her. Playing into the fact that Gia is deaf, the sound of the film is pulled out, and yet Kong leaves an enormous impression. It's because of the low, intense, thundering booms and bass tones that echo throughout this sequence that give Kong a weight so powerful you can feel without even hearing it. As Gia reaches up towards the heavens, the godly creature reaches back down toward her. He is so enormous that she is nearly invisible in their wide shot, and yet he is still so large that the frame fails to capture his entire body. In the close-up, we can only fit the tip of his finger in the frame. The moody lighting, scale markers with Gia, the ship, and the chains, and the textures on Kong's finger, the slow and heavy movements, the low angles, it's all wonderfully tethered together with a beautiful emotional core. This moment is perfection. This is what separates kaiju from critters, superheroes from titans, monsters from gods. Thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it and I hope you enjoy. If you want to see more videos like this and support the channel directly, please consider joining the Patreon linked down below. It is through the support of the patrons on Patreon that I am able to continue to make videos like this for you in the first place. Joining the Patreon can get you early access to content, access to the Discord community, and more. If that's not your thing, please consider joining the channel as a channel member. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you all next time for the next one. D-Man, out.